Morning.
Morning. I watched a documentary the other day on Johnny Carson. It was really well done. It's a little bit like Johnny Carson, except I need a couple volunteers for Ed McMahon and Doc Sepperson. I can think of a few names. Mike Cook has our invitation and pledge this morning.
Lord, we offer ourselves to you to build with us and do with us as you might do with us. Relieve us of the bondage of self that we might better do your will. Take away our difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that we would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. May we do your will always. Amen. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Of the things we think,
Say and do is the truth, is fair to all concerned, will it build goodwill and better friendships, will it be beneficial to all concerned.
still my turn, huh?
That's how Rotary works.
You know, I did do a little thinking about some of my favorite Rotary moments, and really, I mean, when I think long and hard about it, this is not a cop-out. My favorite Rotary moment, or the thing that I remember most about the camaraderie of being at Rotary in the morning, is Mike Conrad and his cackle laughter. usually after Grandpappy, and that really is some of my favorite Rotary.
Thank you, Mike. Rachel and or Michael, Sergeant at Arms.
Excuse me. It's me this morning. Morning.
Morning.
How's everybody?
Good.
Good. So this morning we have several visitors. We have Gunnar Froman from Crescent. We have two people from the Summit Club, Neil Wilcox and Deborah Friedman. And on the guest list, John Nossick is with Chip Person.
Again.
Tom Richardson is with Bobby Christensen. And Marley has two guests, one really, really small guest. 1.5. Yeah, her husband Matthew was here this morning as well. And last but not least, Greg Laskow is Emily's guest, and he is also our speaker.
Thank you, Rachel. Announcements. Beth, you got something you want to share?
I have two.
All right.
There are a number of Rotarians involved with the Global Opportunity Summit. It's engaging business leaders in economic development, education, and nonprofit organizations. One of our former speakers, Cindy, who was a former Rotary scholar several months back, is spearheading this opportunity. It's August 22nd from 8 to 12 in the morning. You can either buy a table or it's $35. I have a few flyers. And also with Summit Rotary, which I sat next to them, Mike Simpson has a group from Russia coming September 16th through that week, or actually that Friday before September 16th. A group from Russia coming, and he needs some volunteers to help with driving. It's an open world Rotarian exchange, and they need some help with some drivers and maybe some, help with some logistical of people that way.
Thank you, Beth. Ralph.
Just want to remind everyone of our 545 tonight at 1618. And also, if anybody has any suggestions on places they'd like to go, maybe they're places of business, let me know, please.
Can you clarify which?
Oh, yes, the wine bar. Because a lot of people haven't been there.
Okay. Thank you, Ralph. Other announcements.
And that's on Longdale.
Kevin Bart, birthdays, anniversaries.
Got for birthdays, I've got on August 5th was Joe Kasmerick, and then on the 7th is Max Kern. And for anniversaries, we don't have any this week, so.
Dr. Chuck Langdon, I'll see you back there. No, you're not. You certainly don't know any money. Perfect attendance. This is left over from the changing of the guard. Well, thank you. Congratulations.
It was obviously for last year.
Well, last week Jonathan got his because he meant, I don't know how you get perfect attendance, but well, we know. There's lots of ways to make up.
And Robbie.
Buster's not here, so you got me again. Happy Dollar. Dan?
Sure. I've got two. I'll make it quick if I can. If anybody saw the district newsletter, my nephew Duncan had a double lung transplant 2 years ago, and the story he wrote was a really good story. There's some perks to people if you give your lungs away. So he had a nice story. You can catch it on that note. And the other one, Katie had her 15 seconds of fame. She was interviewed by Channel 14 for early college at Guilford, and in her story, she was telling about how hard she had to study, and she had to make herself, a room in the attic to study in. Now, my wife redid the upstairs of our house about 2 years ago, so it's a nice place. But I appreciate all the emails and whatnot about the little Vietnamese girl locked in the attic.
Jim.
Sue's got some business up in St. Louis this week, so we're flying up on Sunday. You're going to see a couple of Cards games, see them play the Cubs on Sunday, and then play the Pirates on Tuesday night, and they're 1-2 in their division, so it should be interesting.
Chip.
About maybe 4 weeks ago, Brother Dan Quinn approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to help him cook shoulder or two outside. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to. That's fun. Let's do it. And then about 2 weeks ago, he said, well, we're going to have some other people cooking some shoulders outside. And then yesterday I had lunch with him, and now there are 9 teams cooking shoulders and pigs outside on November the 2nd. And we're going to raise some money for children in Vietnam. And it sounds like we might have 200 people there, give or take, maybe. But anyway, it's turned into a Rotary competition. Summit, Airport, and I think perhaps Crescent, Gunner, or fielding a pig, maybe news to Gunner. But we're going to field some teams, we're going to raise some money. And I'm head of the Gate City Rotary team, and so if anybody would like to come out and learn how to cook a pig, or if anybody knows what the hell I'm supposed to be doing to come out and teach me how to cook a pig, come on out, join up. I'm going to send out an email, but this is a fun thing. It will take up most of Saturday, November the 2nd. I would anticipate a fairly early morning start, not 4:30 like Max likes to do it, but anyway, it will be a fun thing, whatever we end up with. So please keep on the calendar.
Do they allow beer drinking?
Actually, it's required. It's part of
I've got a cat that needs a home, so it's only a 2-year-old cat. It's a beautiful cat, and it desperately needs a home. If I could find this cat a home, I had told other people I would make a $100 donation to the animal shelter. I just need help finding this cat a home. The cat is 2 years old, beautiful. Just wouldn't be well with kids and would not do well with other cats. So,
and adults are questioned.
Dogs are fine, just other cats. Humans are fine, yes.
Okay. Any more? Well, Bonnie, no more Happy Dollar. On that note, you'll like Grandpappy's advice this week, though, contrary to cats. Of course, my family, they're partial to dogs and my involvement, but Grandpappy says you should be the person your dog thinks you are.
That's true. Good advice.
Okay. Emily, you want to introduce our speaker? We've got a great speaker today.
I do, so yeah, very excited to introduce Greg today. I've had the privilege and honor of working with Greg, and it really has been, the clients that we've worked with at CCL. But Greg has had, I don't know, well, I guess officially 3 careers, but I guess your time with the military, you did so many different jobs there. And one thing that wasn't in his little bio is you were a paratrooper for a while too, and jumped out of planes. So yeah, he's done so much with the military, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about some really fascinating work he did during that time as part of hostage retrieval teams, so actually going in to hostage situations. And he was then telling me yesterday that evolved into disaster teams where it wasn't just hostage situations, it was other disasters that they went into. But after his time in the military and he retired there, we did have the fortune to have him out at CCL for, how long were you at CCL? 12 years? Where he did amazing work with organizations and individuals, and he retired from that and then went on to yet a third kind of career where he's still semi-retired but working more than ever, he was telling me. And his lovely wife Barbara, who many of you know, she just retired recently, so hopefully she'll get him to slow down a little bit here. But a delightful couple to know. So again, very privileged to know Greg, and really I know you want to hear from him rather than me introducing him, so I will turn it over to Greg.
Yeah, it's really good to see a couple of familiar faces out there that I've been seeing. And Rachel, I owe you an apology. I forgot that I met you a long time ago. We went out to dinner. Your sister and my wife and you. And so apologies for not recognizing you out there earlier today.
Back at you, because I was like, God, he looks really good.
Yeah, when Emily asked me a while back if I wanted to do this, I jumped on it right away. In fact, first thing I did was I tried to figure out what did I still have left in terms of any memorabilia, photographs, and pictures of the time that I spent in Europe doing what Emily referred to. And I didn't have much at all, over the years that had gone somewhere. And so it was a nice opportunity for me to go back and sort of recreate the story of the team that's referred to here as the, we were officially known as the Hostage Retrieval and Crisis Intervention Team, and sort of recreate that story for you here this morning, and share with you some of the things that we did. Some of those things were somewhat dangerous and in their own right horrific in terms of what happens when international terrorists take Americans hostage. And so I'll share with you some of those stories, not mentioning any names, of course, because some of the information, as you will see, has been classified. And I will show you a document that sort of humorously pictures that. And so, generally speaking, what I want to do is sort of a high-level drive-by of some of the stuff that we were involved with, but give more time to your questions and curiosities about, what does this thing being a hostage of an international terrorist event look like and sound like and feel like? Because I do believe, as you'll see towards the end, that whereas in the 80s when we were doing this, it was sort of over there and not here. Obviously, since 9/11, that has changed. And we also now know, because look what happened this week with all the embassies closing. I mean, so this is not something that's in somebody else's back door. This is right in our front door. I think we have to sort of, be prepared for what might happen if we or anybody we love and our members of our community are ever involved in one of these incidences as we go down the road a piece, and hopefully, we won't see too many of them, and we'll be able to prevent them by some good intelligence. So here's sort of what I'd like to just cover this morning very quickly. What prompted this in the 80s? How did this come about? Who we were, and we were sort of a ragtag group initially when we were first over there in terms of trying to figure it out, because there was no precedent. The closest thing we had was what the Navy called the Special Rapid Intervention Team, but that was a very limited team. The team was sort of located in only a very small portion, I think in Waco Garcia, and that was it. There was nothing in Europe. We were just starting afresh and trying to learn how we deployed. Some of the things were really hair-raising in terms of how we deployed, because around this time, Russia is fighting Afghanistan, and so there's a war going on in our backyard, and so how we deployed had to take that into account in terms of how we got to where we had to go. I'm going to share with you some actual scenarios. In fact, I was able to find a clip, which I will show you very soon here, about one that perhaps of all of the scenarios I was on, it impacted me personally in terms of the type of psychological damage that I saw, what it did to one young lady in particular, who I worked with on one of these missions. And then just share with you some observations. This is Greg Laskow's, nothing really scientific or research-based about it, but sort of anecdotal, what did I learn from this, and wanted to share with you, and ask the question, how can we use this in any reactions that you might have seen throughout the course of your life here, elsewhere, and perhaps maybe, in the future scenarios that we might have to face, even though we'd like to avoid them at all costs. Obviously, then questions that you might have. So, let me just start off with, does that sort of fulfill everybody's expectations of what they thought was going to happen the next morning? All right. So I would like you to just think back. I'm going to switch here. How to do this? Maybe I can do it. Go back here. Yep. All right. I think we're good to go. Okay. So, before I start playing this, I just want to set the stage. This is one that has some international relevance now, because the date is September 5th, 1986, and the location is Karachi, Pakistan. Obviously, Pakistan is in the news quite a bit, as you well know. And a really horrific thing begins to take place. And some very, very, very unusual things take place. This is not the first international hijacking incident of a U.S. airliner, but some very different things took place. So let me see if I can play that for you. It's about a 6-minute clip.
For the onward flight to Frankfurt and took it over. The Ford apparently got onto the apron through a car.
Can you hear that okay?
Okay, disguised as security guard.
Oh, what happened there? That does not look good.
Terrorism.
Is that what you mean by classified?
Yeah. I think we're just going to, bag the computer for now. So here's how it went down. This is September the 5th, 1986. This is Pan Am 73. And what they were quite a few naturalized U.S. citizens on a holiday, a religious holiday, in what is now Mumbai. It was then called Bombay. And they were flying from Bombay to Karachi, and then the plan was to go from Karachi to Frankfurt, and then Frankfurt back home to JFK. Well, that didn't happen exactly that way. And what took place is that as they were boarding the aircraft, the passengers, there were 4 terrorists. 4 terrorists boarded the aircraft in what looked like official Pakistani security police uniforms. And they immediately, took command of this aircraft. And what was fascinating is that the stewardess was able to get word to the cabin crew, the captain and his flight engineer, that this thing was going down and what have you, because that piece of information becomes very, very critical in a bit. Now, they're still in the tarmac, right? Now, it's an interesting sort of scenario, because one would declare, you have to ask the question, is this a hijacked ship? Because up to this point, most hijackings on U.S. aircraft have taken place when the aircraft has been in the air and not on the ground. This is the first. So some unprecedented things were going to take place as well as a result. They had planned, the plan was that they were going to fly this aircraft and then and fundamentally make it a suicide mission. That was their plan initially. Okay, that's not the way it went down. Because what happened shortly after that is that there were 4 terrorists. Imagine this. This is a 747. This is a huge aircraft. I don't know whether you've ever seen how high a 747 is off the ground. It's roughly, the doors, the exit doors are roughly 36 feet off of the ground. So it's pretty high up there. And so shortly after the scenario, and this was only around a 15 to 18 hour scenario, whatever you want to count, is that the captain and his flight engineer escaped from the cabin by a rope. Is that a little unusual? Yeah. A little different. What is the first impression that you would have if you were a passenger? Because they did not know this, but if you knew that, what would be your reaction? I'm curious.
Well, I wouldn't know they'd have a rope to tie that thing down.
Well, yeah.
Captain goes down with the ship.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Isn't that, it's sort of a violation of the old maritime law, you know, that the captain never abandons the ship, or at least as a last call. You know, like Captain Scully up there.
By the aircrew leaving the cockpit, though, the airplane can't take off. So
Bingo.
that's the solution.
Bingo. And that was the reason. Because part of the rules, SOP as it were, is that you don't disable the aircraft. You make it so that it slows its ability to fly. Right? You don't shoot the tires out. Right? So this was a proper procedure for the 2 of those gentlemen to do that. But if you're a passenger, you may not see it that way. You may not see it that way. Because what it did is it inflamed the terrorists. Because that put their ante, they were saying, well, we want, and their demands started to go up. Now the tensions are getting really, really high. Really, really high. And so their demands are not being met. Around about the 15th hour or so, 16th hour depending, the auxiliary power unit of that aircraft shuts down because there's no fuel. And so what do you think happens to the lights on the aircraft? This is start to flicker. And as the debrief went, there was some evidence perhaps that 2, if not all, of the terrorists were also smoking marijuana during the time. Okay? So you can see what that might do in terms of judgment. They started to panic. And what happened was they hurled a number of the former hostages in the center bulkhead of the 747s, and some of the front actually as well, because you can see the aircraft, you can tell. And then they began to machine gun them, and they took their grenades and they were throwing them. Now you can imagine what that must have been like, the bedlam. The doors blew out, okay? Actually, some of the passengers released the doors and began to jump before the darn chute was able to deploy. That's 36 feet up, all right? Some of them got on the wing, jumped off of the wing, what have you. It was pure, utter bedlam, what have you. About that time, the Pakistani security police also were able to board the aircraft and put down at least 2 of the terrorists. The other 2, however, threw their weaponry down and went and melded themselves with the crowd. Sort of, you know, it's like, somebody's been looking at you for the past 14 hours. They're going to see you. They're going to spot you. Anyhow, they got into the terminal. There's one gentleman who described carrying a little girl across the tarmac there, trying to get her into safety and what have you. And it's a really touching personal account because there's an article on him that I just read yesterday that he now still has memories of that day and what happened. So as the story goes, everybody was able to get into the terminal, and they actually got the 2 terrorists, and they pummeled them before the Italian security police could get them. Right? Now, meantime, what's happening is that our group, we're in the air, we're circling, and the way we got there is out of Ramstein. We had to fly south, over, and then up because we could not fly over Afghanistan. So it was an 11.5-hour mission. We had in-flight refueling. Really fascinating to watch that happen. I was in the jump seat watching that happen. And while also we were flying down there, we were configuring. Has anybody ever been in the Air Force C-141 here? Anybody? You know what a C-141 is? A big aircraft, right? They configured that thing as in a hospital ship. You would have, you know, it was amazing to watch. You know, I wish they had taken video of it and what have you in terms of what they were knowing that they're going to be prepared to have to treat in terms of some of the most badly injured folks there. And so that's how they were configuring this ship. So by the time we landed in Karachi, we were ready to receive the most badly wounded people that were from that incident. 22 people, unfortunately, were killed and never made it out. And so by the time we got there, it was H+2. In other words, the scenario had just gone down. The casualties were somewhat stabilized. And we put them into, we received 45, I think it was, badly hurt. These people were really badly messed up. And I'll never forget this. I was helping to load the folks into the aircraft. And I was walking by a police line, I guess you would call it. And somebody reached out and grabbed me like this. It startled me, quite frankly. And it was the aunt of a little girl, and I'll call her Nanja. And she said, "You watch my niece. You watch my niece. You are personally responsible for my niece." Now this is because she wasn't flying back and her niece was flying back. And Nanja had a cast on, and she had a big old bandage here, and it's because a piece of shrapnel from a grenade had gone through her cheek and exited her mouth. Can you imagine that? And so I took personal responsibility for her, and we got her aboard the aircraft, and then we took off. It wasn't maybe an hour after we took off that Nanja was starting to scream bloody murder. It was unbelievable, her screams. And you'll see in a bit here, one of the orthopedic surgeons that was with me from the Air Force figured out that when they put the cast on Nanja's wrist or arm, whatever it was, they put it on too tight and didn't allow for edema, for swelling, what have you. So we had to take that off and what have you. But what it also did was, I'm sitting there talking to her, this is when I hear firsthand and foremost her anger, because by now they learned that the captain had abandoned the ship, and word had spread. And the people who were able to talk were so angry. And we spent most of our time just listening to people about how angry they were, not knowing that that was probably something that maybe saved their lives a little bit. So anyhow, she continued to do that, and she'd fallen in and out of sleep, and then by the time we got back to Ramstein, she was still letting me know how angry she was. We triaged all the casualties to Landstuhl, and then at the time the 97 General Hospital in Frankfurt there. I got a ride back to my quarters in Heidelberg, and so it's my birthday that next day, and I'm sort of back briefing Barb, Jason, my son, and all of a sudden a staff car pulls up. They said, "You need to go back." I said, "Where?" I've just been through God knows how many hours we were doing this. You are to fly with all of the ambulatory former hostages back to JFK. They're now en route from Karachi to Ram Mine, and you're to meet them. And I'm going, "Oh, okay." So we went. I go up there. Thank heavens, I joined up with the guy by the name of Dr. Rashmani, who was a Pakistani psychiatrist, now a U.S. citizen in the U.S. Air Force from the East Squadron. And so he and I were on that mission. We flew with all of the former hostages from Ram Mine back to JFK, and then we came back the next day. Interesting things that we did sort of en route. First of all, we're sort of spending a lot of time talking to people on the aircraft about their experiences. Because I'm going to tell you, one of the things we learned is that when people go through a horrific event like that, for the most part, they want to tell their story, what it was like. It's very cathartic for them to do that. So there was quite a bit of that, and I'll tell you one in particular in a moment. But also we found it was fascinating that both the pilots and the flight crew, the cabin crew, wanted us to sort of help them understand how do we work with these folks who have just gone through this god-awful event. So Dr. Rashmani and I just put our heads together. We put together a spur-of-the-moment in-service training program about what they might look for. So they were sort of like our extenders, because what would happen is they'd come up to them and they'd say, "Hey, Greg or Dr. Rashmani, we think that somebody's having a pretty hard time. Can you go over there?" It was the best thing that happened that we were able to spend some time with those flight attendants, because I think it made a difference. The one in particular that I remember was, she was a pediatrician, and she had her, and if I could play the tape, you would actually see them. It had her son and her younger daughter. And her son, and they were in the upper deck of the 747. And it was one of the flight attendants that said, "I think you need to really go up and talk to the doctor," I forget her name. And I did, and so as I sat down with her, she basically said, what I don't want you to do, I don't want you to let my son, my daughter, be in front of any press when we get into JFK. Now that is a typical reaction. Why would you think that they would not want to have any of their faces being filmed or seen by the press or anybody else? What do you think? Any idea? Might be a target. Now, to some extent, that may not be real, but in their mind it is, because they've just gone through some horrific experiences and they do not want to further expose either themselves or their children. Unhappy. So if you could see the film, is when we got into JFK, she's actually got a newspaper over her son, who's in a wheelchair. The thing that I was most struck by, her son, several of you may have heard of it's an old World War II phrase called the 1,000-yard stare, where, people who come from being exposed to sustained combat, they come out of those circumstances just kind of staring, and they're looking at you, but they're not looking at you. That was this little boy. He was mute, and his mother would tell me that this is not like him. He's just stuck. He was so scared, what have you. Now, his sister, on the other hand, was a real chatterbox. I remember that. So she was very, very concerned about that situation with her son, and I lost contact with them after a while, but he finally was able to come around and come back to his pre-event self, what have you. But it took quite some time. So there were a lot of other incidences about that particular scenario to share with you, but those are some of the highlights of that. And the team that I referred to actually was put together in response to the, anybody see Argo? Okay. The Tehran, 444 days, 52 hostages, what have you. And that has been declassified. Very helpful document, right? I got a lot of information from them. And I love it too, they even got the word secret redacted, So, okay. But, there were those hostages that were able to, quote, escape into the Canadian embassy, but there were 52 that were not. 2 months ago, and I still do a lot of work for the Special Operations communities of the Department of Defense. And 2 months ago, I had the honor, I think, to be able to talk to one of those former 52 hostages, because he was a member of the group we were working with. And he took us out to dinner that night. And I'm going to tell you, we heard stories that you and I will never see in the press or in writing, what have you. And it was god-awful. Nobody was spared anything. And I want to read to you a little bit about what isn't redacted. All hostages suffered some form of psychological and physical mistreatment during their captivity, or were tied, handcuffed, blindfolded, incarcerated in prison, and threatened at one time or another. Most hostages feared for their lives at some time during the period. During the takeover in the first few days, many received very rough treatment and were threats. The sounds of the mob outside the embassy and the constant possibility that the mob would come in to get them was particularly stressful over the long-term component of each person's captivity. A number of the hostages were subjected to mock executions. One in particular I remember is they had 3 of them in a room, and they had a candle on the table, and then they had what the hostages felt was a machine gun, but under a tablecloth on that table. And it was their conviction that at some point in time, when that candle burned down, that thing was going to be taken off and they were going to be shot. Or they would blindfold them and cock the gun right next to their head. And sometimes would actually fire it off, but obviously not to kill them, because nobody was killed during that scenario. So the overall treatment of the hostages has been quite varied. Of the 52, at least 20 can be considered to have received serious mistreatment, physical or mental, solitary confinement, and mock firing squads. They tended to pick on people that they found out were members of the CIA, and of course, as you can tell. And so they tended to be a little bit more brutal in their treatment of those individuals. It was because of that incident, and if you recall, we also tried to rescue those hostages. President Jimmy Carter was president by that time, and we went in there, and now the infamous, what was called Desert One, where a Sea Stallion collided with the C-130 and crashed, and the mission was scrapped. We lost several good soldiers at that point in time, My good friend was there. He was with Delta Force. I was part of that operation, what have you. And so I was able to talk to him on his coming back about me. So he needed to decompress and debrief a little bit on his own about what had happened. As a result of that mission, in 1984, UCOM, Army European Command, stood up. It was an Air Force and an Army team. Basically what we did was we had all mental health professionals and what have you, as well as medical professionals, orthopedic surgeons, technicians, and what have you. So for the full count, we had about 22 people on the team. And the first time that we actually redeployed as a team was another event, and I'll share this with you. You remember there was one, it was called Flight TWA 847. The unique features about this particular hostage situation was they were supposed to be flying, let me see, I forget, their final destination was, I think it was Rome, yeah. They were in Athens and they were on their way back to Rome. The hostages, once it took off from Athens, commandeered the ship, commandeered the aircraft. The scenario as it went down is that they demanded the release of a certain number of Palestinian Liberation Organization prisoners that were being held in prisons in Israel. What was fascinating here is that the hostages demanded that they land in either Beirut or in Algiers, yeah. And they kept going back and forth from Beirut to Algiers, Beirut to Algiers. Now, a couple of times they were being denied landing, and here this aircraft is running low on fuel. And one time in particular, landing in Algiers, they actually blocked the roadway until Captain Teskra, the captain at the time, demanded that he said, I'm landing this aircraft, whether you have that thing cleared or not, I'm landing, because otherwise, we're going to have a whole bunch of casualties, I'll take my chances. And he landed the aircraft. And at times like this, when they went back and forth, I think it was 3 or 4 times, they actually would release some of the hostages. Okay? During either the second time when they tried to go into Beirut, I think it was, because by now the aircraft is on the ground, right? And what's happening is, I don't know whether you remember him, his name was Petty Officer Robert Stephan, a young guy, just totally invested in the United States Navy. His brother was a SEAL and what have you, Navy SEAL. And what they did was they found out that he was in the Navy, right? And they brutally tortured him, and then they shot him in the aircraft, and then they pushed his body out the rear of the aircraft onto the tarmac. And there's actually film footage of all of that happening, and it's rather nasty. As they're going back and forth, they're leaving most non-American hostages go and go away. As a sidelight, as a result of Robert's death, he was awarded the Purple Heart and the Silver Star, I believe. And there is the USS Robert Stephan, one of the top naval vessels in the Navy's inventory today. And you can see his gravesite. It's uniquely marked because they have a place in Arlington where servicemen and women are buried as a result of terrorist incidents, and what have you. And so you can see that area where he's at. It was a 2.5-week ordeal after they finally began to release these hostages. They were dispersed there were 39 of them left by this time, and they're dispersing them all throughout Beirut. And these people had a similar experiences. They were tortured, shot at, mock executions, what have you. Eventually, the terrorists destroyed the aircraft, right? And escaped. Delta Force was flown in, and Delta Force rescued all of those hostages, got them out. Obviously, it's classified as to how they did that. But they got them all out, and they were flown to V-Spot. And that's where we met up with them. Our team did not deploy for this scenario. We received them, and we did the debriefing. And V-Spot, which I believe is now closed, I don't know whether you remember, what would happen is that they took over the pediatric ward, and there was a camera outside on the hospital grounds, because the hospital commander and obviously other agencies did not want to have the press anywhere near these people. Why would you think that's the case? This one may not be so obvious. Why would you not want the press to be interviewing these people who had just arrived at the hospital? Any idea? The chief reason, yeah.
I would assume to keep the intelligence or to get
Bingo.
the best intelligence.
That was it. That was it. Because, you know, this intelligence is about what was done to you. That's why all that stuff is redacted, by the way. Because we don't want the, quote, terrorist to know that what we know what he does or she does as a terrorist. So that's vital information. So they were actually on a balcony outside the pediatric ward, and there was a camera there, and a microphone, and speakers, and I saw this, the news crew were outside the gates, and that's where they were asking their questions, what have you. So, as it happened on the ward, what we would do is, I didn't know this, it was counterintuitive, but it made sense. We would go into a room with one of the former hostages, sit there with them, put them at ease and what have you. And I'd be sitting there with a gentleman or a lady from the FBI, from the CIA, or from the State Department. And there's all four of us are firing away questions at this guy, or this woman. And I thought this would be annoying to them. In fact, it was not. In fact, it was once again, cathartic. Telling the story was extremely important to them, no matter who asked, and no matter how often they asked the same question. So that was a fascinating experience. Another one, a gentleman that I talked to, he was very, very angry. Let me just say that. And the way he described himself as before, he said, "This incident has changed my life forever." He said, I am a pacifist," he said, "but now if I had the ability to bomb with a nuclear weapon that country, I would do it in a heartbeat." That's how angry he was. Another gentleman, during his captivity, for 2.5 weeks, he wrote a song about his captivity, which was really intriguing. And he said, "I wish I had a guitar to be able to play that song." And being a guitarist, I said, "I'll get you one." And I went to the American Red Cross. They got a guitar. I gave it to him, and he played the song, and it was touching. It was touching, unbelievable. Interesting thing, he never gave it back to me. I remember when he was leaving, and they were going up the steps of the aircraft to go home. He had the guitar with him. And then one other incident, and then I'll give you one other scenario, and then we'll sort of begin to close out. There was a gentleman, he was an elder gentleman, I remember one time. He's walking on the ward. He had hospital pajamas on, which I think was rather strange. I don't know why they did that. But nevertheless, he said he'd like to go down to the Air Force Base Exchange and get a pack of cigarettes. And the security guard, and they were out there in full love, I'm going to tell you. They would not allow him to go downstairs to the BX. He said, I'll never forget this, he said, "I thought I was no longer a hostage." Whoa. So that made us rethink, you know, just what you do to somebody inadvertently that sort of does something similar to what they'd just gone through, held them back, and what have you. So we had to be very careful going forward on that. The hijacking of Achille Lauro. Remember that one? Mrs. Klinghoffer? They were on that cruise, by the way, because she was dying from cancer. And Mr. Klinghoffer, Leon, was a disabled American vet in a wheelchair. And their plan, well, I won't go into the detail of what the terrorist plan was, but it was, again, another suicide mission they were planning on doing. And when the demands were finally not met, they ended up shooting him twice, once in the head, once in the chest, and dumping his body over into the ocean. You know? What happened was they escaped from the ship. The terrorists did. They got on board Egyptian Air. Egyptian Air was on its way to Tunisia. Well, talk about a come around about what's been happening over in that part of the world. The President Reagan then put up some aircraft, F-15 Tomcats. We forced the aircraft down at Sigonella, Sicily, which is a Navy base at the time. The aircraft landed. Delta Force surrounded the aircraft. Surrounding Delta Force was the Italian security police, and there was a standoff. There was a debate as to who was going to have access to this aircraft and the hostages. And finally, somebody smart, I guess, in the State Department said, "Hey, Delta Force, we need to back you up because it's an Italian flagship, you're on Italian soil, and therefore we're going to give this to the Italian security police." Long story short, one of the things that happened, my good friend Cal escorted Mrs. Klinghoffer to the Italian jail, to the Italian lineup. They don't have one-way mirrors in those jails. And all 4 of those gentlemen were lined up in front of her, and she spit in each and every one of the faces of those 4 people. So that gave her some closure. Now, Mrs. Klinghoffer did not live much beyond, I think, 8 months after that event, what have you. And her daughters are now still in some sort of pursuit of justice on that, because all 4 of those terrorists escaped. No longer in jail. One, however, the ringleader, was recently captured in Baghdad during the Iraq War. Abu Abbas was his name. And very last, you know, this is where we started moving the mission from hostage retrieval to crisis intervention. The Gander crash, anybody remember that? We had the multinational peacekeeping force, we still do, in the Sinai, and it's a 6-month rotational duty. The 101st Airborne Division had its turn on that. Flying out of the Sinai into Cairo, then Cairo to Sigonella, and then Sigonella to Frankfurt, and Frankfurt to Gander, Newfoundland, and Newfoundland back to Fort Campbell. You know how long a mission that is. And the flight that took off from Gander, the aircraft was not properly de-iced, and 256 soldiers lost their life, boom, in an instant. There were still 600 people still back in the Sinai. We were flown back in to sort of provide support, whatever we could, and encouragement for them at that time. And flew back with them, along with the multinational peacekeeping force commander, to Sigonella. And then our team leader, Dr. Sokol, I think very smartly said, because we were supposed to fly all the way back to Fort Campbell with them, we said, this is not right. We're doing the work of the senior non-commissioned officer corps, and they need to be the support arm. And so we backed out of that mission and turned it back over to the NCOs. I thought that to be the smartest thing, because it gave an idea that there's not something wrong with you having to have a bunch of psychiatrists and psychologists hanging around. Your leadership will take care of you and do a good job doing that. And there's a very touching memorial to those soldiers at Fort Campbell, where I spent a lot of my time today. And of course, we had Chernobyl. We had 25 families that were exposed to the way that the winds from Chernobyl blew some of the contamination over them. And if you look on the blog site today, many of them have hypothyroidism and other thyroid disorders, and so do their children who were there at the time, who are now obviously adults growing up. So, here's what I observed. Terrorism is ubiquitous. It's not in our back door, it's not in somebody else's neighborhood, it's right in our front door. Think about terrorism reactions, you know, like as a victim, that there is a primary, secondary, and a tertiary. Primary is obviously the hostage themselves. Secondary, however, would be like the families of the hostages, and also like the aircraft industry, right? I can't tell you how many people would not fly after 9/11. The aircraft industry just went, no problem. That would be a secondary. And then you take a look at the tertiary, which is the long-range effects of the economies of the hostages can be affected. And that's exactly what's happening right now in terms of what happened recently with regard to the closing of the embassies and what have you. In some regard, if you watch the stock market, it got real jittery when that was happening. So that's an example of that. And lastly, I'll leave with you that there's a couple other, but I am now and will forever be a believer in the resiliency of the human spirit. Because no matter what you actually have somebody be exposed to, not to say that some of these people aren't still traumatized today, so many years later, but they're getting through it, they're living with it, they're able to survive, they're very resilient. And so, you know, my faith was really restored in that. And this is why I believe, this is Greg Laskow, that this thing we're calling post-traumatic stress disorder, I think is very harmful. There is an initiative right now with a former Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. He says we're calling it a post-traumatic stress disorder, and that is victimizing these people. It needs to be labeled post-traumatic stress illness, injury, not disorder, injury. That's a different kettle of fish in terms of how that's handled. So, probably went over my time, I'm thinking, close to it. So, those are my thoughts, my observations, questions, a burning question or two out there? Yes, yes.
One thing, I guess,
Yeah,
is
we'll
that a
send
web
out
link?
one, yeah.
Link, maybe we
We'll
could
send
watch
a
that
link.
video.
Oh yeah, I'll send that to you.
That would be helpful.
I have two actually.
Greg, what's your personal understanding or feeling on faith? People's faith.
Oh yes. Oh, and heavens. Well, in some of the stories that we heard, you know, it was probably more often said than not that, you know, if my faith got me through this thing. My faith got me through this, and I prayed hard, and and as a matter of fact, I was with a soldier just yesterday who had been through some pretty horrific things in Afghanistan, and that's exactly what he said. So faith played a huge role. Those that were, I believe it. Those that not, they did other things to sort of get themselves through in terms of social support with each other in that same small room that they were in. The faith played a big role.
Are there any keys or common threads in people that survived, that got through this, things they said they did, or they thought they did right, or things they thought they did wrong?
Oh, well, one of the things that I can speak more for the latter is the more combative a former hostage was with a terrorist, the more punishment he or she incurred. You know, they started, and there's a whole, yeah, probably you may have heard of this, there's a whole philosophy of training how to do that in the Department of Defense now. It's called survival, escape, resistance, and evasion. How do you resist effectively without being confrontive? What have you. So there's a lot of lessons learned for that school that a lot of special operations communities go through, were learned from what happened from the terrorists, from the hostages.
So I can join up, take the class, take the course.
Well, since I know what the class is, I won't go through it. I'm too old for that now. One more question. Yes, sir.
Well, I just think we all need to be thankful for all the thousands of unsung heroes, I mean, like yourself and others in the armed forces and so forth, that have done all this behind the scenes and unbeknownst to everybody else, to get these hostages through this, get us on the other side of these terrible events.
Yeah, I appreciate that, your comment, Jim. Yeah, thank you. And on behalf of all the folks that aren't here, you know, I think they would appreciate it as well.
We'll stick around here for a minute. Don't forget the cart fund, if you would, please.
Oh, somebody's going to win something?
Somebody's going to win something. Objectively draw a ticket. And read the last three.
Okay. I have 115.
Have a great day.
Take care, see you next week.